I can personally tell you that within my own family and friends that I know of, the number of people who have passed away because of COVID is in double digits. Even when you associate the word game with something as serious as COVID, the intention is not to trivialize the situation. It is more or less trying to identify what's the best way that we can communicate the importance of these things.
I've just finished talking to Dr. Abe Karnik from the University of Lancaster. Abe and his team have developed a video game called Point of Contact. What makes Point of Contact so special is that it's been designed specifically to see whether games as a medium can be used to influence and measure people's attitudes towards the COVID-19 pandemic. This is part of his broader research into how humans interact with computers and with data. I started by asking Abe why this field of study is so important.
The theme that or the field which I work in is called human-computer interaction, and by default, what it means is how do people and computers come together as a system, and then can actually generate something beyond what could be just possible with a human or just a computer. So that's the start point for me, and that was what I did for my PhD. But overall, over a period of time, I always realized that the kind of work that needs to be done is to simplify the processes for people. And it's not about designing nice interfaces, but it's rather about looking at what can be the next thing which will help people achieve the objectives that they're trying to achieve. And that is where it's not necessarily always performance. It's about probably discovering new behaviors, new interactions, things which would not be otherwise feasible. So that's the thing. It's to kind of probably tie it back to the oldest one, as we call it within the community, we call the mother of all demos. Like when you look at Doug and Woolpard, putting up the demo of his first computing system, and that's the kind of inspiration that you want to kind of be at that point, that you create the next mother of all demos, which kind of puts people. So that's the driving more motivation.
From an outside perspective, why is that the mother of all demos?
That's the first time when you actually get to see a mouse, you get to see a graphical user interface, and in a way, practically, if you look through this, almost 2 hours long. But if you look through the stuff that he does in there, are literally the things that we use as fundamental basis for practically everything that is there. So if you think of organizing your lists, you think of doing shopping, you need to think of using PowerPoint, you think of organizing lists. Everything is rooted back in that specific original demo. So it's a very powerful one, and especially when we ask our students who are coming in for the first time and then they have no idea what human-computer interaction is, we always tell them, look at that video, because you'll suddenly realize that what was spoken 60 years ago, almost 60 years now, is still very much relevant to what we are doing nowadays. So that's literally why we call it as the mother of all demos.
Have to dig that out. So
it's a very interesting video.
Yeah. Going forward, then, I mean, there's the technology, VR and AR, maybe the biggest ones. Are there other technologies that you think maybe aren't given as much attention?
I would say, well, there's tangibility, which is one of the things that we are into, and specifically we're looking at how you make a data point, for that matter, a data set more physical, so that you can actually manipulate it with your hands and get a feel of it. When we look at HCI specifically, we always think of not just the sight, which is the standard display thing that you normally work with, but also to look at all the other senses. So it's your hearing, it's touch, it's sensations, vibrations, haptics, everything is a channel, and we can potentially leverage every single channel. The question always is, what is the best channel for what you want to achieve? And that's literally what we explore.
Gotcha. And I suppose then video games is maybe a natural part of that as well, or is it a bit outside of your comfort zone?
I would say when I started 10 years ago, I never thought I would be actually looking at video games. But it was a kind of a happy coincidence that I was handed this module to teach. And obviously, it was not about development of games, but rather the design of games. And that kind of concept stuck well with me, because it's something which we tend to do a lot with the HCI stuff we do. And I felt that there was a lot of angles that we could bring in from HCI side. On a similar point in time, when I was just starting to do that, we also had this kind of an offshoot of a conference. So for human-computer interaction, the researchers, Kai is the main conference that we think about. But then this new offshoot emerged, which is called Kai Play, which is looking at basically play-based activities toward garner towards human-computer interaction, and it kind of fit well with the whole idea. And I was like, okay, this is something that we can focus on. And this is something which also from an educational perspective, for that matter, even young children learning stuff. If you think of a child, before they encounter a textbook in a school, they probably have encountered a game. They have probably played something on as a digital game, or for that matter, a physical game, and they know more about that. And obviously there are educational theories around it that say that play-based learning is actually sensible. What I am trying to do at the moment, and obviously I'm not the only one doing it, but the idea is to kind of tie back the principles of HCI, the understanding that we have about human behaviors as well as human interactivity, and use the concepts of game design to put together something which is more interesting. And that's literally what I've been doing for the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years at the moment.
Yeah, nice. Did you ever play video games before? Or are you like a complete outsider when you started teaching?
Well, so it's interesting. This might be a little bit controversial in terms of the terminology that I use for it, but I feel that I have a bit of an addictive personality when it comes to games. So if I get hooked to a game, I'll play that. In fact, I played Minesweeper unbelievably when it was, back in time, and then that was easily accessible. Far many more times than I would like to admit. So I try to stay away from games, but at the same time, if it's something where when I'm in the background and I'm actually building it, I think it's more, effective. Yeah. I do have to keep up with the latest trends and things like that. So I do look at videos of how people put things up. So people like who have Twitch channels, for that matter, they're doing live streaming. And from a teaching perspective, this was also very important for us to understand those concepts, because we had students who would come in with this mindset that I'm going to build the next Forza or the next Halo. Yeah. And we had to kind of remind them that is not the only way games are designed. The games can be very wide in terms of how they're put together. And there are lots of different ways. In fact, while these are A-list labels, they are not the ones which are making the biggest amount of money. In fact, surprisingly, things as simple as a Candy Crush probably earn more money than some of the big labels.
Oh, for sure.
They are
much easier to develop as well.
Exactly, and that's the most interesting thing about it is people don't realize, especially people who are used to playing games and the ones who actually are engaged with consoles and stuff. And they have this whole mindset: this is a nice game, yes, but in reality, there is a whole set of other games which are low-cost developments, even indie developments, and they have far more, I would say, niche audience, but it still works for them. And that is something which, to me, it's definitely, I'll probably say, the next generation powerful medium of communicating, with people. That's,
right. I mean,
what I
you,
see that.
You think of things like Stardew Valley, where one person developed it and then it blows up. It's
exactly. I mean, it can be something as trivial as Flappy Bird for you to imagine, but it has its own. And I can obviously say that I picked up Pokemon Go because that was augmented reality, and it was the first iteration where people were starting to have a mainstream store, I would say, team associated with an augmented reality game. And I can tell you that I quit playing literally just about 2 or 3 months ago. So I spent that much time on it.
Okay, they're well designed to hook you in.
Absolutely, and that's some of the things that we do teach, and when we're trying to explore, especially when we were trying to engage the audience for a more serious concept. Because obviously, games are games; they are entertainment. But when you look at games as a serious, I would say, mechanism of delivering information, you still need the hooks. You still need the mechanisms in which your person stays engaged with the game. And if it works in the real world, for us, it's a system that we need to understand, because there is a human behavior aspect in there, which we can then apply and help that to achieve our actual goals, which in our case is potentially educating people.
Yeah, and so you guys developed then Point of Contact. I think it was a master's
Yes.
group project, if I
Yeah.
I remember correctly. Could you first
Yeah.
just give a bit of an outline of the game? As I understand it, it's Among Us with COVID kind of thing.
Yes. So I can tell you this. Obviously, from a perspective, the story behind it. We were in Malaysia in about 2017 or so, and we met epidemiologists who talk about modeling pandemics and things like that. Which at that time nobody knew of COVID, but obviously knew about other viruses. And they had this conversation that at times it's very difficult for people who are normal people going about their daily lives to understand what we are trying to tell them, because it's not put in the context of their own lives. And that was the concept that we were trying to develop. And we thought, okay, maybe we could actually develop a game. And we spent some amount of time trying to figure out what that game would be. However, for various reasons, we couldn't take it forward. So roll over to 2019, 2020, we have COVID emerges. I had some of these thoughts about what we could do. In fact, during March, which is where our first lockdown in UK was about to start up, I spent some time building a game which was like augmented reality or virtual reality. You could take a choice between the two and show how a virus gets washed away by hand washing. So the idea was that you have a tap, and the tap is what you're using to attack the virus. And this was to kind of if people want, because at that point in time the hand washing was the first thing people were being told to do, and it kind of kept on moving on. And come 2020, and we started our module for teaching in what is known as innovations in interactive computing, which is a master's level module that we run. I just kind of breached this idea that you could design a game which would help people understand the effects of preventive measures. And then the group hooked onto it, and they started having a conversation. And so when we got to that point, Among Us was actually becoming very famous at that point in time because people were playing it. We had, the AOC from, United States, one of the representatives were actually, going on there to play it and, use that as a platform. Obviously, Among Us, if you think about it, it's a very old game as such in terms of the original concept behind it. It's the same as Mafia. It's a lot of other things which have been previously done before. But the thing which hooked us was the fact that you could actually put a simple player map wherein people were doing tasks which they would understand that they needed to do a simple task. So we said, okay, what if we adapt this to a supermarket or an office scenario? And we ended up picking up the office scenarios because that resonated the most with people. There are people working in offices. Offices were not originally designed to handle a situation of social distancing. And you still have to work, because at the end of the day, this is one of the questions which is coming up again and again. Like, do we shut down the economy? Do we shut down everything? And or do we save lives? So it all, fell together, and we were like, okay, here's the game. Yeah, in a game overall, you have the office scenario. It's the same as what people would encounter in real life. They go into an office. They don't know if a colleague is actually infected or not. And this is before lateral flow tests were straightforward available, that you could actually do it in 20 minutes and get a result. It took a while even before the PCR tests were actually available. In fact, when they were initially available, they would probably take about 3 or 4 days to turn around the sample. So the person is faces this quandary. They may or may not know they're infected, but they know that there are the standard things that people are supposed to do, because the government messaging was there: hands, face all the time, wash your hands, cover your face, maintain social distancing. So we're like, okay, now everybody knows about this. How about we put those into the action of the game? So the implicit mechanics, as we call them, were that you could hand wash, you could use a sanitizer, you could open a window, you could put on masks, which had an effectiveness. It would, the effectiveness would drop off as time progressed, and you could potentially physically do social distances if you wanted to. We didn't warn them about that they are not doing social distancing. They just could if they wanted, and we actually intentionally put up each other. And the expectation was that they would go through the game. They would understand that, yes, obviously the understandable concept is that you're trying to increase your economic score, which is the same thing which Among Us does. You have the task that you need to keep the ship running. We didn't have any covert elements which wherein somebody's trying to, the social reasoning aspects were totally removed from it because it didn't make sense to have those mechanics in the game. But in our case, the patient zero and the subsequent infections were important. We had this information that if you're wearing a mask, your probability of getting infected is something like 20% with close contact with an individual. So we did the same thing. We did probabilistic mechanics on that. If you were in contact with a player who was infected, it would not guarantee that you'd get an infection, because that's exactly what happens in real life. I'm hoping that the same situation persists for me, that the close contact that I've had doesn't result in an infection, because I was wearing mask, I was hand sanitizing constantly. And it's same ways the probabilistic mechanics apply. At the end of the game, you find out your score in terms of the task. Also informed about the number of, and it also tells you if you infected other people. And the whole idea was that if the whole office ends up infected, obviously you lost the health side of the game. You might have a very high economic score, but the health side is gone. So this is just the general series game that we built together. And now, obviously, we evaluated it. For our evaluation, we ended up with a situation that we just went into lockdown at that point in time again. So the evaluation required us to pull the participants who were within the same housing bubble.
Yes,
if that made sense. And what we ended up doing is that we ran about 3 or 4 iterations of the game, and we were collecting data as to how the people behave in the game, how many people get infected, what is the usage statistics and things like that. And then we analyzed the data, and across the board we found similar sensible results. Like people assumed that they were doing more social distancing than they actually were. People were in more close contact than they thought they were. They thought that they were using the preventive measures more than they actually thought they were. Again, this is another thing that we found, that the amount of usage was less in the beginning. But the interesting trend to it was that as we did 3 iterations of the game, the usage actually increased. They were more aware of it. They were more focused on actually using those things. But I would say the most interesting thing for us, and this was actually something which was also initially discussed, that we had this perception back in time, and I think it probably persists even now to a certain extent, is that young people are less affected by COVID. It's the older people who have the worst out. But at the same time, this also kind of leads into some of the people having this opinion that the economy therefore is more important. Let's keep it open. Let's keep the young people in the workforce and keep them going through the process. In fact, some of the people we evaluated, we asked them, what is more important to you, health or economy? What you have a preference to it? And what we noticed is that after 3 iterations of the game and seeing that they ended up either infected or not, and the usage that they got to see, their perception literally 1:1, if you compared the values for what they thought initially and what they thought afterwards, was that they felt that health was more important. There was literally a statistically significant result on that, showing us that there was a definite change in perception. They were, even in their comments, it was reflected that we thought that it was not as dangerous as we thought. It is easier to spread than we think it is. Given this, the health needs to be protected more than anything else.
And you guys didn't give them...
That was actually a bit...
Sorry, you guys didn't give them that. Yeah. You just gave them the rules of the game, and they came to that conclusion just from the system.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And this was actually the one of the things that we were looking for specifically, because one of the things that happens in serious games, and again, when I say serious games, there is obviously a series of people who have tried to do this. One of the things which I have as a takeaway is actually one of the game developers, I forget his name, unfortunately, but he says this, that you need to make sure that your serious game actually entertains and doesn't make the learning an explicit activity. All right. It has to be an implicit action. If you make a speech, if you ask them to play the game and you make a speech, then that is what he calls a Screedware. And those games don't necessarily get the message. Screedware. So SCREED ware. I'm not sure. He's the only person who uses that term, but I really like that idea because exactly, because it's very interesting. To a certain extent, I can give you a very old example. So most people will have played the game called Snakes and Ladders, right?
Of course.
Now, yeah. So Snakes and Ladders, obviously, at this moment, as a mechanic, it's just a game of chance that you're going up or down the thing. But originally, when it was introduced somewhere in around 13th century AD, it was called, the game in its local name was called Vaikuntapalli. And the idea with that game was that every ladder was actually associated with a good deed, which would actually increase your, I would say, good deeds. And every snake mouth was actually a bad deed, which is telling you that it was actually taking you away from, I would say, a future afterlife of righteousness. And this was the original source for the original reason why the game was developed. Now, obviously, we played stripped of all of that context. But if you just look at that, it doesn't preach anything. It just gives you a direct consequence of actions and associates what happens when you end up on something which is negative or something which ends up on positive. So that's a kind of difficult balance to achieve, that you need to keep there is an element of chance that you might make mistakes and things like that, which is perfectly what they're trying to bring out in the process. But there are modern day games, and I think there is one or two of these examples are straightforward like this, that there is no context or no relevance to the actions you're performing with respect to the learning that you're looking for, as we call it, the learning outcome for it. And you're just playing the game. It's just that the title probably suggests to you that it is related specifically to the learning outcome. But that happens, and that is exactly what that designer says you shouldn't do. And that's always what we had at the back of mind. It worked very well for us, and I think we always think about how do we make sure that this process of creating the implicit mechanics helps the person's learning process.
No, but I think your game in fact goes an extra layer further than that, because you know, I guess the labels are there, but as I said, it's like being within that system that enables the players to come to their own conclusion. You could still decide playing that game that the economy is the most important thing, and that's why we should do X, Y, and Z, right? But
it's open to them.
But they interpreted it the other way.
It's open to them.
Very interesting.
And we never had imagined that we would actually see the results that we saw. In fact, we were not even looking for it. We had this as one of the questions, that what is important, health or economy? We never had any explicit requirement for them to talk about it, but we just straight away saw the result. And for us, that was the main thing. To us, it was surprising, but at the same time, it was, I would say, rewarding, because it made sure that it told us that, yes, I think we had success.
I was wondering then, do you have any plans to take this further? I mean, obviously you were limited by your sample size. Do you want to test it more or develop a new version? Like what's next?
To be honest, at this point, the game itself that we have probably is where we would stop. But from the perspective of the actual idea that we have in there, I would really like to take it forward. But what we are looking for is now for partnerships from other scientists. So if there is an epidemiologist out there who find this useful, we would really like to, in fact, there is a whole section in our paper which we talk about going beyond just this game. So what this game could be used to do is to evaluate the effectiveness of messaging, because we found this as a result in the study again, is that the initial campaign that the UK government ran, which was Hand, Space and Space, was well received, or for that matter, everybody was aware of it, and they could actually pick those things out and perform those actions. But literally about, I would say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks before we ran our study, we had another additional requirement that the government was pushing out. And I have seen adverts for it. I recall seeing the adverts because obviously we were looking for information. And one of them was to improve ventilation, opening a window. It was literally that. And we found that not only people were not well aware of that mechanism. The first thing that you walk down a corridor is an opportunity to open a window. So to us, this was actually an indication that if you want to test out the effectiveness of a messaging, the game is a very good way to do it, because you're not explicitly asking, did you see this message? Did you engage with the message? It's more like, yes, the message is out there, or for that matter, you could even place the message within the game, but you would then ask them to play the game to see if they're actually engaging with the same actions that you're asking them to do. Because if you ask somebody, have you seen the video? Yes, they would say yes. Would you do the action? Probably yes. But in reality, would you see that action happening? The game is the one where you actually see if they're performing the action or not. So that's one of the things. Another interesting way to go with this, to approach this game would be that if you were to change the map altogether. So you take it out altogether, you put another map, say a supermarket. So our superstores over here had a one-way system that they were trying to build. And you would probably not automatically notice what are the challenges that come up with having a system like that. Because what would happen is that they would have to play the game. You could give them a set of tasks, like, here's your shopping list, get the shopping done. And you would automatically notice how the people move around the store based on the layout of the store, but actually finding that they've forgotten something or they're coming back to it at a later point in time. And how much of, I would say, breach of the one-way system you would see. And that could give them a measure without having to actually, test it in real life. You bring in players within a short period of time. You have an understanding of what's going to work and what's not going to work. So it has extensions which can be used to understand the human behavior. It can also be used to evaluate the effectiveness of messaging. And obviously, from our perspective, if we are also trying to ask the players to have a change in their own perception, then we already have evidence of that. So there's 3 different directions this could go. I would just be happy to have collaborations for that. That's what we're looking at.
Yeah. So we spoke about this a bit before we started the chat, but one of your family members was affected by COVID.
Yeah.
And as well, on a broader note, this got me thinking in a more general sense of, living within, the COVID world and having family members who are affected that, and then having that be part of your work, kind of gives you nowhere to hide. I wondered if that's motivational or depressing, or like, how's that been?
It's interesting. I'll tell you that. I mean, I can tell you that obviously I'm an academic who's based in UK. My immediate family is actually not here. They're in India. And throughout the whole pandemic, this has been a constant worry for us that they would get affected negatively. Yeah. In fact, I actually spent an enormous amount of time ensuring that when the vaccinations became available, they actually got it at the soonest possible by trying to get the appointments booked, which was not an easy experience, but we managed to get it done. And at the same time, there were news coming out of there, which were always very, very worrisome for me, because I can personally tell you that within my own family and friends that I know of, the number of people who have passed away because of COVID is in double digits. Jeez. So it's not something which has just lightly brushed us. It has affected us. In fact, my maternal uncle, who is one of the people, in fact, I kind of pay homage to him in the video that is there. Yes, in fact, he got his first vaccination. And apparently what our understanding is that he somehow got the infection while he went for his second round of vaccination. And in a way, we thought that he would pull through, but in a very unexpected manner, he passed. It is something that affected the whole family much more than all other previous experiences. And then there were a lot more other news coming through, which were not really that positive for us. Yeah. So to a certain extent, I think it's more or less, I would say that tempers or the way I think about COVID, or for that matter, any of the things that the research that we're doing. It's that there is a personal element to it. And the intention over here is that we are not making light of the situation. I think I take it more seriously than anybody else that I know of, simply because of these experiences. And therefore, even when you associate the word game with something as serious as COVID, the intention is not to trivialize the situation. It is more or less trying to identify what's the best way that we can communicate the importance of these things across. So that's I would say is a very important I would say distinction to make here. Is like we're not making light of things, and because when people think of games, they usually think of entertainment. They're like, oh, you made a game for COVID. How's that nice? But no, there is a thought. There is serious considerations behind it, and there is personal, I would say, experiences which also drive how this is motivated.
Yeah. Well, do you have any, to kind of finish on, do you have any words of advice for, I don't know, young people, young game designers, or young scientists for that matter, on, you know, how they should or could better work together to do more projects like this?
Definitely. I can tell you, though, just to kind of have a bit of a plug in here, we actually are working on a whole new set of games at the moment, some of which are in collaboration with plant scientists to increase the awareness of plant science in the young population, which we, at least in where we are, it seems that it's not the most commonly covered element of curriculum. And I would say that, yes, games are a powerful medium. It is almost getting to the point that this is going to be something which everybody will definitely have awareness of.
Yeah.
Now, as a medium, the medium is totally, I would say, agnostic of what content goes through it. And it's the job of a game designer as well as that of a scientist to try and figure out what's the best way to use this medium to, I would say, improve the lives of everybody. I mean, it's always easy to make an addictive game, but it's also a good way to consider how you could use that and turn it into a positive experience. That's the main thing. In fact, we are actually, one of the things that I really like to be able to do in the next coming couple of years or so is to actually write up a framework which helps us convert what is science, and I mean science as in hard science, which like you look at a paper in there, say Nature or Cell or Scientific American, and you want to make sense of it, but it's too complex. The medium of games could potentially be a way to help you digest it in smaller pieces so that you can actually get to the end result. So that's one of my, I would say, goals to the end of the day. I say that, you know, this is our framework. Here's a framework. You take your paper, convert it into a game, and let somebody understand it. Then when they normally not be able to make quick sense of it, if that makes sense. Yeah.
As always, a huge thank you to everyone who made it this far in the video. If you liked it and want to see more, please subscribe to the channel, drop a like, and get involved in the discussion in the comments. I'll catch you next time.